I never planned to come back to Coldwater. That's the first thing you should know. When I was a kid, my uncle used to take me out there every summer, a long, winding drive through miles of pine forest to a cabin that sat right on the edge of a silent lake. No phone service, no people for miles, just the smell of wet moss and pine sap and something old in the air that you couldn't name. After he passed, I never went back. Until last autumn. It started when I got an email from a real estate firm I'd never heard of, regarding the property of Arthur D. Holbrook, my uncle's name. They said his cabin had never been sold, and since I was listed as next of kin, I now technically owned it. I wasn't thrilled, I wasn't sentimental, but I was curious. I'd been living in the city too long anyway. The constant noise, the late shifts, the sleeplessness. So when I took a week off work, I thought maybe I'd drive up there, clear my head, maybe even fix the place up a bit. It was a 6-hour drive north, the kind where the roads start to shrink and the trees seem to swallow the sunlight. My GPS stopped working halfway there, but the memory of the turns came back instinctively like something buried deep. By the time I reached the dirt road leading to the lake, the sun was setting behind the tree line. The forest looked endless, dark trunks stretching up like pillars of a forgotten cathedral. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I just sat there for a while, the headlights cutting across the fog that had started to form over the lake. The air was cold. Still, not a single ripple on the water. It was exactly how I remembered it, except quieter. The front door creaked when I opened it, and a burst of musty air hit me. The place smelled like rot and damp wood. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and a family of dead moths lay beneath the windowsill. But it was mine now, apparently. There was a wood stove in the corner, and the same old rocking chair by the window facing the lake. That's where my uncle used to sit for hours, just staring at the water. I dropped my bag, took a breath, and opened the back door to step out onto the dock. The boards groaned under my feet. The lake stretched out like a sheet of glass, black, motionless, and deep. Somewhere out there I thought I heard something, a faint echo like a voice calling from across the water. But when I listened again, there was only the wind through the trees. Or maybe not even that. Just silence. I went back inside, locked the door, and lit a single lantern. The first night at Coldwater had begun, and I swear even then something was watching me from the lake. That first night I barely slept. Every sound seemed to echo through the cabin. The creak of old wood, the whisper of branches scraping against the window, the occasional drip of rain from the eaves. But what kept waking me up wasn't any of that. It was the sound of the water. At around 3 a.m, I heard it. Soft ripples, like something moving just below the surface. I thought it might be an animal at first. A fish, maybe a beaver. But it went on too long, too steady. When I finally looked through the window, the moonlight was pale and silver on the lake. And that's when I saw it. Tiny circles of movement, spreading outward from the middle of the water, as if something was rising. I waited. And just when I thought I was imagining things, the circles stopped. Dead still again. I told myself I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks. But when I turned away from the window, I could have sworn I saw movement. Not outside, but in the reflection of the glass. A shadow standing on the dock. I spun around. Nothing there. The next morning, the fog was thick enough to swallow the trees. I made coffee and stepped outside. Everything smelled of wet pine and cold air. That's when I noticed something strange on the dock. Wet footprints. They led from the very edge of the water to the door of the cabin. Small, bare prints, like from a child. But the wood around the dock was frozen with frost. No one could have walked barefoot through that. I stared at them for a long time, feeling the air tighten around me. Then I did something stupid. I followed them. The prints ended at the far side of the dock where the boards were slick and green with algae. I crouched, peering into the water. For a moment I saw nothing. Just the reflection of the sky, pale and shivering. Then, a flicker. something pale moving beneath the surface, like fabric twisting in the current. I reached for the lantern I'd left near the post and leaned closer, and just as I did, something whispered. It wasn't clear, not words exactly, more like a breath pressed right against my ear. Cold, wet, and it came from the water. I jerked back, stumbling. The lantern tipped and rolled down the dock, stopping just short of the edge. By the time I looked again, the lake was still. No sound, no ripples, no whisper. But that night when I tried to sleep, I heard it again. Soft, low, like someone calling my name through a mouthful of water. The next few days blurred together. Every morning, the fog would lift just enough to see the outline of the far shore. Dark trees, pale mist, the same still water. And every night, I'd hear it again. The whispering. Sometimes it was faint, like the sigh of wind across the lake. Other times it was close, so close I could almost make out words. I stopped sleeping properly. The cabin felt smaller each night, the walls breathing with the cold. On the fourth day, I decided to check the shed behind the cabin. My uncle used to keep fishing gear and tools in there. The door was half rotted, hanging off one hinge. Inside, everything smelled of oil and mildew. There were old cans, rusted nails, tangled nets, and something else. A small wooden box tucked behind a crate of fishing hooks. It had my uncle's initials carved on top. ADH. When I opened it, there were photographs inside. Dozens of them. Most were of the lake. Different years, different seasons, fog, sunlight, winter ice. But one caught my eye. It showed my uncle standing on the dock, holding a fishing line. And behind him in the water, there was something. A shape. Human. Barely visible through the surface. A pale hand, reaching up. I stared at that photo for a long time. My uncle's expression wasn't joy or surprise. It was dread. Like he'd seen it too. That night, I had the dream. I was standing at the lake again, but everything was wrong. The water was black, the sky pulsed faintly red, and the air stank of rot. There were figures beneath the surface, dozens of them, drifting just below the light. Their eyes were open. I felt something touch my ankle. Cold fingers. Then a voice whispered, "Come back down." I woke up gasping, my skin freezing, the sheets damp with lake water. Not sweat. Water. The floorboards were wet beneath the bed. I scrambled for the lantern and swung it around. There were wet footprints again, this time leading from the door to the side of my bed. Smaller this time. A child's. I was sure of it. When I opened the door, the fog was thick and heavy. The dock was barely visible, but there, at the very end, was a figure. Small. Still. Looking right at me. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. Just silence. When I took a step forward, the figure turned and walked straight into the lake. Not fell, not slipped, walked. And as the water swallowed them whole, I heard it again. That same whisper. Only this time, I understood. It said my name. I didn't leave the cabin that morning. Didn't move, didn't eat. I just sat by the window staring at the lake until the fog burned off and the sun hit the water like glass. But I couldn't stop seeing that child. That shape sinking into the depths like it belonged there. By afternoon, I'd made up my mind. I needed to know what was really down there. I found my uncle's old journal in the same wooden box where the photographs were. Most of it was about repairs to the cabin, fishing notes, the weather, until the last few pages. Those were different. The handwriting was shaky, the words rushed. It's not the lake that's haunted, it's what's under it. They built the town too close, they didn't listen. I still hear them, the ones who drowned when the valley was flooded. Flooded. That word kept echoing in my mind. I remembered something from a long time ago. My uncle telling me how Coldwater wasn't always a lake. It used to be a small valley town called Marrow Creek, until the government dammed the river upstream to create a reservoir. The whole town was evacuated. or at least most of it. I found old maps online later that night, the outlines of where Marrow Creek used to be. And sure enough, the center of the town, the church, the school, the houses, was right beneath this lake. I thought that was the answer, a tragic story buried underwater. But then I noticed something else in the journal, the last line he ever wrote. They come up when the water is still. I put the book down and looked outside. The lake was dead calm. The air felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing down on the cabin. And then I saw them. Dozens of pale shapes rising through the water, faces barely visible through the dark, their eyes open, their hair floating like smoke. The drowned people of Marrow Creek. They didn't move like swimmers. They drifted, weightless, their limbs trailing behind as if gravity had forgotten them. And then, slowly, one of them turned toward me. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding. But even inside, I could hear the whispering again. Louder now, layered voices overlapping like waves, calling, begging, crying. Then something answered. A deep rumble rolled beneath the cabin, like the groan of wood under pressure. The floorboards shook. The water outside began to churn, bubbles rising as if the lake itself was breathing. The lantern flickered out. And in the dark, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, wet, heavy, and slow, moving across the porch toward the door. The knob turned, once, twice, and stopped. Then, a child's voice whispered through the crack of the door. "You came back." The voice on the other side of the door. It was small, soft, but it carried that same echo the lake had, like it wasn't really coming from outside, but from underneath. I stood there frozen, staring at the knob. The metal glistened wet in the lantern light. "Who's there?" I whispered. No reply. Just a faint scratching against the wood. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging through the grain. Then, the sound of water dripping. A single drop hit the floor by my feet. I looked down. The space under the door was dark and wet, water seeping through from the other side, spreading across the floorboards like veins. And with it came a smell, not rot exactly, more like the sour scent of still water that's been trapped for years. I stepped back. The lantern flickered, and for half a second, I saw a movement in the glass, the reflection of someone standing right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. When I turned back, the door was wide open. Fog poured in, thick and white, carrying the sound of rushing water though the lake was still, and standing in the doorway was the child, the same one from the dock. Dripping wet, skin pale as milk, hair plastered against his face. He looked at me with eyes so dark they reflected no light. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered. Then, all at once, the ground beneath us trembled. A sound rose from the lake, deep, guttural, alive. The entire cabin shuddered as water burst through the floorboards, gushing up through the cracks like the lake had decided to reclaim what was once buried. I stumbled backward, choking as cold water surged around my legs. The walls groaned, and through the window I saw them, the drowned people. Hundreds now, clawing their way out of the lake. Their faces were blank, their movements wrong, twitching, jerking, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. But behind them, something larger moved beneath the surface, a shadow that made the water bulge outward, as though something vast was pushing to the surface. The boy looked at me again. "You can't keep what's beneath," he said softly. Then he smiled, a strange, sad kind of smile, and stepped backward into the rising water. The walls split open. Water crashed in from every direction, pulling me down into the black. I remember sinking, my lungs burning, my body weightless, and through the murk, I saw faces, dozens of them, and among them, my uncle. He didn't look surprised. He just reached for me, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying on the shore. The cabin was gone, torn apart, scattered like driftwood. The lake was calm again, as if none of it had happened. But when I looked down at my wrist, I saw it, a small wooden bracelet, carved crudely from driftwood. It was the same one I used to wear as a child, the same one my uncle said had fallen into the lake decades ago. And as I stared at it, I realized something chilling. I didn't remember ever leaving the water.